Okay, episode 15.
What movements do you think are underrated or underestimated in training and in testing for fitness competitions?
Okay. So I'll say up front that these movements probably won't be the same as to what they're underestimated for in training and what they're underestimated for in competition. So we'll do the training stuff first. I don't. Again, that's hard. That's a hard question, right? Because I'm obviously my experience is mostly with my training, right? It's mostly with my training. So I like to think that I don't think there's a lot missed in what I give people. And then the only real experience I get with people's training is watching or is hearing from them as their new clients and ask them what they're doing, what they have been doing, what they're like with this stuff and whatnot. But in a large part, I would say a lot of people don't do the right type of core training. Are probably the main issue. Most of the movements I see people doing are with core training or any kind of that kind of work. Anything involving the trunk, anterior, lateral, or posterior muscles. It's done for creating movement is what they're doing, as opposed to stabilizing themselves and kind of bracing for movement or trying to prevent movement in certain ways, that kind of thing, which is mainly what you want to be, right? If you look at all the main lifts, like the deadlift, the back squat, the front squat, the split jerk, snatch, you're not moving here, right? You're trying to stabilize yourself so you can be a solid rock and then support the loads and move the loads. So I think a big oversight for a lot of people is that they do most of their core training is involving movement of the spine as opposed to what I mentioned before. Definitely not enough simple posterior chain work, like specific work for back extensions, GH raises, leg curls of some kind, whatever. They're the main three I usually prescribe to people. Just to counteract the amount of knee flexion, right? The amount of knee flexion people are doing with squatting, lunging, all the Olympic lifts in general, and generally just biking, right? Air bike, using the rower, running, they're all quad dominant movements. So you need to have a focused area and focused work on the hamstrings just to make sure they're of sufficient strength. For one, to hopefully allow for maximal progress and strength, and two, to allow for hopefully injury prevention, right? And there may be some carryover just by doing those movements to like some other specific movements to posterior chain, like power snatch, power clean, deadlift. I don't know if that's true or not. I would highly doubt it, honestly. But if anything, it'll keep you healthier longer. Then like I would say skill work, doing skill work as skill work's supposed to be done, generally in a non-capacity scenario, right? Like what you just did. The skill work you just did was a long EMOM. It wasn't really fatiguing. Shouldn't have been. If it was, you're pretty out of shape. No. Yeah, it should be the skill should be focused on to improve the skill. And that's the way skills are done, right? They're not done in capacity settings when you're first learning things or when you want to master them. You do it for precision and perfect practice is what you're trying to get, because then practice will become your performance. So you want the practice to be perfect. What else?
What about some single arm work?
Yeah, single limb work in general, so like even step ups, lunges, that kind of stuff. Dumbbell pressing overhead, rows, dumbbell presses like horizontally. Yeah, that's not used. Like that's not used very much, from what I can tell. Yeah, and I would say the most underutilized movement pattern, I would say this, is horizontal pulling. It's the most underutilized movement pattern for training for the CrossFitters that I've seen or come across. The motion of like obviously pulling this way, right? It's a movement that's not done enough, and it has certain benefits that pull-ups don't have, right? And it should be done. And once you get people that have certain injuries, most of the time you're gonna have to keep their arm over their shoulder, so you're gonna start getting into that anyway. And what you should notice, what people will notice is that if they've never done it before, they'll notice that their shoulder strength is or the shoulder just feels much more solid. It feels more protected. And in general, like, you're just using your shoulder in another movement pattern that it should be trained, but it's not being done. And again, just the same explanation as I would say with the hamstrings, you're trying to create the most stable joint possible, and you want to be strong in that motion as well, which can then improve doing pull-ups, and then you can avoid overuse injuries potentially by doing that. But then obviously just with beginners, and if you see them, and if people have never used dumbbells and they're beginners, they're gonna look kind of weird. Like the dumbbell, they're gonna be very uncoordinated. And it's good for people starting out because the dumbbell forces you to, each limb has to do its own thing. It has to, the right arm has to push. If you're doing bench press, the right arm has to push, the left arm has to push. Whereas obviously with the barbell, you can kind of, if you have a unilateral or bilateral issue, like the right arm's stronger than the left arm, it may be hidden a little bit with like push pressing, shoulder pressing, bench pressing, dips, push-ups, that kind of stuff. But it'll be a little more obvious with the dumbbell pressing, and then you can address that as you wish. Yeah, the same thing we were saying with the dumbbell rows, horizontal pulling, step-ups are never done. Like, they're never done.
As a strength movement.
They're never done as a strength movement, as an assistance movement. Yeah, it's just not popular, right? And then, but but in training, I can see some value in it and carry over potentially to competition. And this is where we'll start talking about competition stuff, but suffice to say with the training stuff, I don't know, I can't remember what we covered to list it out, but none of those things we listed would be involved in competitions, that we would do in competitions, right? Like, yeah, you can't do core testing for competitions, like that kind of stuff. I don't think you can. Like GH raises in competitions, no. Like, well, the single leg stuff you can, right? Lunges and that. Dumbbell work, it can be used in competitions. It's rarely done. But then with competitions, one of the most limiting things in the sport as it currently is there's very, very little, if any, lateral movement. There's nothing, unless it's you facing this direction. It's always you going this way. That's it. Like there's nothing about going laterally, like whatever. Things are always very symmetrical the way it's done, and that's why for example I like a dumbbell power snatch. You have to create some form of twisting, and some form of unilateral stability, and it's just different. And the same thing with an overhead walking lunge with the right arm. That's a slight variation on a symmetric movement. It challenges one side more than the other. So you're getting some of that, like single arm carry, like heavy carries compared to one side and the other, or just having to pull a sled sideways, or just having to do like a shuttle sprint where you're forced to stop, and then on one like that the girl just did, you're forced to stop sideways and then drive out of it and then drive out, and you'll quickly see both people's strength and their agility and proficiency in doing those movements, which are obviously quite common in most athletics, right, with regards to running. Competition, other than there's lots of things that are underused in competitions, like obviously running is not used enough, and it's not used, I don't think it's used properly. I think running needs to be held up as the same level and standard as snatching or clean and jerking with regards to the priority placed in the training, and the priority placed on the placement in the competition. Like you can't just take running and just throw it in the middle of something and say, yeah, we did running in the competition. It's like, yeah, but you didn't test running. And running is the most fundamental movement there is to fitness and discussion. There's no other movement that's more fundamental to fitness than running. That's it. Not a squat, not a deadlift. Running is the most fundamental human movement you can do. Right? Yeah. Like, I'm sure cavemen were hanging around going, like, yeah, all right. It's like, man, your squat's awesome. That's really good. It's like, no, you got to run and do shit. And it's just not tested. It should be given a higher priority. So if you're going to do running, there should be a running sole. It should be only running. Yeah. For at least one event per competition. So Yeah, like last year in our competition, right? We had a 1 mile run. That was the one event, um, and then but we also had another event in which running was featured with other movements. Because then that obviously that has a running combined with other movements has a very very high aerobic potential, and creates a very very high cardiac output, and it's just very challenging. But running should be, I think there should, most competitions, if they're going to do running, and I think just the bias in general, but running should be put on the same pedestal or higher than snatching and clean and jerking. There's not with testing movements specifically. Ones aren't done enough. I think lunging's not done enough specifically. Ones that's done too much. Overhead squat, like it's every overhead squat is all the time. It's just, and I think overhead, like I don't think snatching is done too much. Like snatching has been in the regionals basically almost every year for the last 5 years or whatever. I don't think it's done too much. I think it's an important movement. But I think overhead squatting is done way too much. Not done enough. Heavy carrying in competitions. That takes having a large event with lots of events to create the right layout to be able to do that stuff. Because again, like we talked about in a previous episode, if you only have so many events to have, you need a large amount to start getting into those other events when you know you're going to have your primary event designs for the top 4 or 5 events. And if you only have 4 or 5 events, one-day event, you probably shouldn't be doing carries because they're not that integral to testing the athlete, but they are important. Sled pushing and pulling, I'm a big fan of that. And in general, events that are short, but not just short and like difficult, like short and brutal. So again, it's about the design of the workout is about not managing fatigue, but exposing potential, if you know what I mean. So you don't want the event to be like 90 seconds, like last year, 64 pull-ups for the regional, 64 pull-ups. Yeah. Some people did it unbroken, and then they just walk over to the bar slowly, right? And they finish the bar, finish the squats, they run to the finish line, they're like, cool, I'm done. Like if it was a really all-out 90-second event, you're not running across the finish line and like pumping your fist. You're running across the finish line and then you're going to your knee. You're gonna have to because you're completely exhausted. So just different idea. Not doesn't have to be this event, but a 500-meter row. Like you finish that event, that's as hard as you can possibly go. The test is allowing the person to go as hard as possible. And that's what I mean by exposing potential, as opposed to 64 pull-ups and you're just managing how tired your arms are going to get before you go do the overhead squats, because you have to watch for that. Or if it's like 30 front squats at 185 and then 30, I don't know, bar facing burpees. Maybe if that's what it was. The first 30 are like, for me, I'm going to have to break them up. So, and most people are going to have to. So it's not the same thing. You're really, you're limiting people, and they're having to manage how fast they're going to go, because they're managing their pace to get the best time, as opposed to going as hard as they can to get the best time. In events like 400-meter run, 500-meter row, like even that 15-12-9 power clean burpee couplet, like 100-meter sled sprint at a moderate load, like that type of stuff. Those type of events are sorely missed. There's a lot of stuff. I don't know. What movements do you think are not included that should be included?
Yeah, I agree with running. And I see that from this spring, this summer, I see a lot of swimming in European competitions, like in Italy, Croatia, even in Slovakia. There's a swimming pool near some area where is competition. There is some swimming event involved. Like swimming in something very, very basic on the ground, like burpees, pull-ups, stuff with kettlebells. So swimming has got, it's very popular right now. I don't know if it's beneficial for testing. It's really great for spectators. It's fun to watch, but I don't know how much time of your life do you spend in water. So how important is swimming compared to running, and how much time you spend on your feet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then aside from that, like if you want to use the argument of like being able to survive anything, like you should be able to swim. It's like, yeah, you should be able to swim. I have no argument with that. But you probably should be able to, walk for about 3 days too.
Yeah.
That's probably more important.
Or run.
You gotta be able to move for 3 days. Let's test that. It's like, well, it's too long. It's like, I know. But like or climbing a mountain, or like hiking like a hill that's like 3 or 4 hours long. Just a simple long endurance event.
Yeah.
Like that's, I don't know. That's pretty important.
I think it comes from who designs the workouts.
Oh yeah.
And what is his kind of definition of testing.
Yeah. I can see why, from an argument standpoint, why swimming would be tested. Yeah. But I don't know. I'm not a fan of it being tested.
If you've got
really not. I'm not. Yeah, I'm just not a big fan of being tested.
If you've got many events to choose from, or multiple day competitions, yeah, probably yes, because you want to test a lot of skills, a lot of stuff.
Yeah, they're pretty much just going to cover like all the bases, right, at the CrossFit Games. That's where they're going to, because they're going to have to hold it up and say this is the fittest man in the world, and woman, right? And they're going to want to be able to say like, yes, they can swim. But just because you can swim doesn't mean you're good at it.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah, good conversation.
Yeah, that's enough.
Yeah.
Thanks.